Good afternoon. My name's Lynn Jennings, and I'm Vice President for Grants Management at LSC. I'm moderating today's panel where we'll be talking to a number of LSC executive directors who've been leading their organizations through a continuous cycle of disasters, not just COVID-19. Joining us today, we have Robert Doggett, the Executive Director of Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid. We have Leslie Pell-Boudreau, Executive Director, Legal Services of North Florida. Hadassah Santini-Kohlberg, Executive Director for Puerto Rico Legal Services. And Nick Smithberg, Executive Director of Iowa Legal Aid. Our first question is, Nick, if you could give us a brief overview of your service area and give the audience a sense of what disasters you've been addressing with your service area.
Sure thing. We are the sole statewide provider of civil legal services in Iowa, so we cover all 99 counties. To frame this from the perspective of my personal experience, I relocated to Iowa about 3 years ago, and during that time, a tornado destroyed the city of Marshalltown. We've had extensive flooding in essentially every county in the state at least once, in some cases 2 or 3 times. Not one, but 2 polar vortexes. And to cap it all off, last summer, we experienced something called a derecho. Many of you are probably unfamiliar with this weather phenomenon. A derecho is an inland hurricane, a straight line hurricane, very rare, but very deadly storm system. And we experienced winds in excess of 110 miles an hour cut through the central portion of the state. So, you know, a couple of lessons learned in all of this is one, the Midwest is beset by what I would call small disasters, not small in the sense of the experience that people have with them, but small in the sense that the media attention is fleeting if we get it at all. Oftentimes FEMA assistance is unavailable because the relief formulas are tied to property values, and a lot of times Iowa just doesn't make the cut. Many times survivors are located in remote rural areas. And so there's a real kind of risk of people becoming invisible, people who have been impacted by these disasters. Second observation, just to echo Chief Justice Hecht, is that while emergencies are urgent, recovery is a long slog. And I think anyone working in disaster relief has experienced that. I know we are still representing residents of Marshalltown who were impacted by the tornado in 2018.
Thank you. Robert, what does it look like in Texas?
Well, it's a small state, but big problems. Our service area runs from El Paso through to Brownsville, so the border counties, 68 counties, but also runs through the coastal bend, Corpus Christi, obviously, and also through Brownsville. So we get our share of hurricanes pretty much every other year, roughly. Harvey being I would say the most devastating and more recent. But we also get a share of flooding that come through either caused by either a particular storm or a hurricane. But we have a variety of those events also about every other year, it seems. And those even run into Central Texas and not just on the border. And then, of course, as most of you may remember, Texas isn't very good with cold weather, like 10 or below, and things stop working. And so this February, most all of the state had a tremendous winter freeze and caused incredible damage. And many are still experiencing it. And so coupled with all of those things, and of course, COVID has made things extremely difficult on our clients and our staff.
Great, thank you. Leslie, tell us about what's going on in North Florida.
Thank you, Lynn. Sure. I'm the Executive Director of Legal Services of North Florida. So we, to better describe that, we're basically serving the Florida Panhandle is the best way to describe it. So into a little bit of the Big Bend region, but mostly that western corridor of Florida that includes the 2 time zones and makes it a little bit unique. For the most part, our disasters have been hurricanes, and we're able to prepare and see them coming. Over the past 3 years, that's been a little bit less true. Hurricane Michael came through in 2018, we only had about 2 days worth of notice that it was coming, and it got strong fast, and people were prepared for it to be maybe a tropical storm, and suddenly it was a Category 5 storm that entered Florida and exited Florida into Georgia and Alabama as a Category 3 hurricane. So it remained impactful throughout that entire journey through Florida. I think 3 million acres of timber were damaged. The storm surge caused damage to the oyster beds, which so many of our fisher people rely on for their own employment and their own income. Hospitals were destroyed throughout the 11 counties that were ultimately declared FEMA disaster areas. And so to add insult to injury, in 2020, in the middle of a pandemic, Hurricane Sally came through at a very slow pace as a Category 1 storm that, just moving about 2 to 3 miles an hour, dumped inches and inches of rain on the far western panhandle, and then and caused flooding throughout the panhandle, including many of those same counties that were still recovering from Hurricane Michael. And all of this in the middle of a pandemic and trying to recover from that as well. We are also not, we also had some of our own unique disasters with the 2010 Deepwater Horizon oil spill, which impacted our economy as well and has caused recovery efforts to be needed there. And as we're bouncing back from that, in particular, those oyster people, you know, those two things in particular, as well as some other issues, have really decimated that industry here in Florida. So what that means to, you know, to our clients has been widespread and significant affordable housing loss, and many other things that I think we're going to talk about further into the discussion. It certainly has given our program an opportunity to figure out what that response looks like on a repeated basis, similar to my colleagues that are joining us today.
Great, thank you very much. And Hadassah, unfortunately, Puerto Rico has also been seeing its share of major disasters. If you could give the audience a sense of what you've been coping with over these past several years, that would be helpful.
Sure. Thank you, Lynn and LSC, for your invitation to participate in this panel. I am very pleased to be here with you today. Well, as many of you may know, during the past 4 years, Puerto Rico has endured several disasters. In September 27, we were devastated by 2 major hurricanes. Irma and Maria destroyed the electrical grid of the island, water reservoirs, and severely affected the food supply chain of the island. Many families lost their homes and belongings or suffered severe damages. Thousands of people died, particularly those living in remote islands. In December 2019 and in January 2020, we were hit by 2 major earthquakes that severely impacted the western part of the southern part of the island, destroying homes and school buildings in that regions. And earthquakes are unknown to my generation and to younger generations because the last major earthquake that hit the island occurred over 90 years ago. In July 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic, Tropical Storm Isaias hit the western part of the island, causing severe flooding and leaving many families without a home. So as you see, we have experienced major disasters in a short period of time, leaving people here in fear of a new disaster while still recovering from the previous one. This experience have allowed our program to look on ways and changes in the way we do business and be better prepared to serve our clients. So we are conscious that we need to be prepared for future disaster because we are living in one of the regions most affected by changes in the environment, the Caribbean region.
Thank you very much. As we detailed quite extensively in LSC's Disaster Task Force report, responding to disaster requires a different kind of approach to civil legal aid, different subject matters. So what overall impact have all of these disasters have on the types of cases that you serve and the clients that you serve? Nick, let's start with you.
Well, sure. I mean, for our clients, these disasters have sort of broad ripple effects in many cases. And so things like travel can become disrupted for a long time. A lot of bridges are out. The 10-minute drive takes now an hour and a half. This impacts this housing stock, real shortage of affordable housing in many parts of the state, only made worse by flooding. But I think, you know, at a more human level, the compound impact that these series of disasters have on our clients can be really devastating. And to give one particularly poignant example, in my view, there was a day in February of this year when the low temperature in the state of Iowa was negative 20 degrees. That's without wind chill. And to put that in context, the low temperature on that same day in Antarctica was -2. And on that day, there were homes throughout central Iowa with blue tarps instead of roofs because they were still waiting for FEMA relief from the derecho. And so, you know, I think you look at something like that and say, how does that happen in the wealthiest, most powerful nation in the planet? And I submit to you that something more than just a string of bad luck is going on here. And there are real vulnerabilities in these communities and systems that just don't serve the clients who get impacted by these disasters.
We also talked about the impact of the pandemic and an increase in domestic violence and sort of the types of cases that are changing as a result of the pandemic. Can you comment on that as well?
Well, sure thing. As was earlier discussed on the panel, clearly we've seen an enormous uptick in employment cases, something like 450% increase, which was sort of the leading edge of the coronavirus pandemic, leading into a tremendous upsurge in eviction cases. And that's gone from about a quarter of our caseload to more like half of our caseload. And it's what we do right now. And that's the area we're most responding to. We're starting to see an uptick again in family law cases. I think different service providers have seen different levels of domestic violence cases. I think our numbers in Iowa have been somewhat depressed, which nobody thinks is because it's not happening. It's just that the normal channels are not available for people who are seeking help. So those are the major trends for us.
Great, thank you. Robert, how about you?
Yeah, well, just to follow up on that last question, absolutely, family violence has increased dramatically in our service area. When you put the various disasters and the hardships that they've caused, it has put a tremendous strain on the family unit, and that, of course, has naturally turned into a lot of unfortunate incidents and people being unsafe and being in danger. And we have had many more requests for services for family violence issues. And that's from shelters. Shelters are full. Shelters are requesting more and more services because of the dramatic increase in what they've seen in their area. And so we've had to adjust priorities and raise them essentially so we can try to get to the most important cases. It's been a very difficult process and talking about what those priorities should be at this point, but we've had to make adjustments because of these various disasters that have sort of led to this point. And certainly we've seen increases, dramatic increases, as Nick was mentioning, in unemployment questions and issues. Benefits, obviously, it's an incredibly difficult patchwork now more than ever, and obviously housing and instability there. But to back up slightly farther is the Texas freeze actually has just made it even more difficult. We have people that still don't have water to their buildings. The pipes froze because the electricity was off for so long. And 10 degrees is not something that many Texas builders prepared for. So we had many homes and apartments that lost power, and the result of that was broken pipes, which has now resulted in a lack of water. And still, to this day, we still have many that do not have water service. So you put these various things together, and it's just been an incredibly trying time. On top of that, of course, not just homes impacted by that freeze, but businesses or farm workers. Citrus trees are gone. I'm sure Leslie will mention. There's a whole a large path that has led to more unemployment and will continue to because of these loss of jobs that may not be coming back anytime soon. The stimulus packages that have been passed are helpful, obviously, to many, but some aren't going to reach those jobs that a lot of our clients had before this freeze. So it's been devastating and will continue, and we don't look for it, frankly, to get better anytime soon.
Great. Leslie, what are you seeing?
Much the same. The affordable housing issue and the eviction issue really go hand in hand. Affordable housing was an issue before 2018 when Hurricane Michael came through. When it came through, the most urban areas that it hit were those where poor people lived geographically. And when you look at the census data, those are the ones who were hit the most and the hardest. And when those properties started coming back, developers started coming in and trying to develop them into other kinds of housing. These are coastal communities that property had value. And we are really struggling to find good affordable housing that's not substandard in many of these communities. The issue of unemployment is an interesting one, because after Hurricane Michael, a lot of the jobs that were opening and were there couldn't find anyone to fill them because there wasn't affordable housing nearby for people to live in and actually work in those communities. So if people were commuting an hour plus a day to get to the jobs that were there, fortunately, because there was lack of supply, some of those salaries went up and some of those hourly wages went up, but that didn't sustain into COVID. And so while Florida remained more open than many of our other states during COVID, those workers were the ones who were being impacted by the risk of health and the risk of infection. So, and they have to keep the jobs because otherwise they can't continue the commute and they can't continue to be employed. So, those are the challenges that sort of this double whammy of hurricane recovery and COVID has meant in those communities. I would add that one of the real challenges has been the flow of recovery dollars into Florida. They didn't even come into the state of Florida until well into 2019 and almost 2020. We thought that those federal dollars to rebuild and to recover were going to be available in August of 2020, and that did not happen. It was not until January of 2021, for a disaster that happened in October of 2018, that those federal dollars started becoming available for rebuild assistance within our community. There was no, at that point, the opportunity to go back to FEMA to have a review of those benefits had expired. And so we're right now in the process of getting all the information that we can to make sure that people are applying for those dollars and letting them know that there's resources available if they're not given. But that's 2.5 years basically that people go without that rebuild assistance, and trying to figure out how to do that in the middle of a pandemic is even more challenging. So while we can support those issues without I can support those clients without that flow of dollars, there become limits to what we can do in a timely manner to help in that recovery.
Hadassah, you're seeing some new areas of practice arise as well. And so can you tell us what you've seen in the last several years, and particularly compounded by COVID in Puerto Rico?
We have seen a surge in certain type of cases after each disaster. For example, after the hurricanes, housing cases and emergency petitions to grant temporary custody of children to relatives living in the United States were the first cases that we received. And with the pandemic, we've seen an increase in employment cases. and in domestic violence cases, that after each disaster, for the reason we think the stressor, the stress factor in the families provoke this increase. We've seen that throughout the island. And at this particular moment, the largest increase we are seeing in service requests have to do with mental health cases. In Puerto Rico, there is a mental health crisis due to, among others, the stress caused by so many major disasters in such a short period of time, and now the pandemic. Right now, Puerto Rico, according to the information from the CDC, is at level 4 in the pandemic, which means very high level of COVID-19. This is the worst COVID situation since the pandemic began back in March 2020. We've seen a surge in cases, particularly among young people and children. Most hospitals are full, and the doctors are saying that maybe in 1 or 2 weeks, there will be no more room for more patients. So it's getting to become a health crisis right now. And we expect that as soon as the moratoriums end in June, housing cases will surge also and will continue affecting our clients. Also, a lot of cases related to public education, particularly in vulnerable population of special education children or children with special needs. They haven't been able to get services for more than a year, which has also provoked a surge in these type of cases. We are trying to cope with all of that with the resources that we have and with the help of our pro bono program and PAI attorneys.
I think what's interesting in what the panelists just provided, it brings to life what was said in the business panel, that the events of the last year or so have just magnified the disparity of the haves and the have-nots in the last year, and the proliferation of different types of cases. So we know that it's had an impact on clients, and I've moderated several panels about COVID-19, and we've talked about the stress and the impact that it has on your staff. So could you tell us, Nick, how is it affecting your colleagues?
We really do have a sort of a 1-2 punch going on between the natural disasters and the pandemic. For the disasters, let me just say that it's personal for us. You know, we live here, and the origin story, if you will, of our disaster project was the fact that one of our attorneys in the Cedar Rapids office lost her home in the 2008 flooding. I mean, she showed me where her house is, and it was 10 feet underwater. And so she went through the FEMA relief process herself and learned how that system works. And that's really how we got started. The derecho hit, knocking out power in large parts of the state. And particularly hard hit was Cedar Rapids again, where they lost cell service and internet access as well. And so we had staff camped out in other offices in Iowa City and Dubuque. We had our managing attorney. She found a place where she could get a cell signal about 10 miles away. And so she would conduct her business in the parking lot of a gas station, just because that was the only way we could keep it going. I mean, I personally was in the middle of trying to run a board meeting during all of this. Thankfully I had cell service, but no electricity. And so I was doing a finance committee sitting in the front seat of my car with my iPhone plugged into the dashboard, running the hotspot on my iPad with finance statements all over the dashboard. Not really ideal way to do business. In the 2019 flooding in Davenport, the waters came within 2 inches of our office, and we had staff camped out in a local public library. When the tornado hit in Marshalltown, one of our attorneys was there that day, and she took shelter in the meat locker in a supermarket. So this stuff gets really close to us. And in terms of the COVID effect, I think it's just trauma, the stress, the fatigue, the burnout. I mean, there's so much uncertainty and anxiety for so many people, and so much vicarious stress and trauma that we experience through our clients, and all sorts of cognitive factors compounding one another. People work slower. They're like COVID brain, I think, is a real thing. Zoom fatigue is, I think, at this point pretty well documented, but also just the anxiety of people. The court systems in Iowa were open and running in person at a point in time, I think, that was earlier than in many other jurisdictions, and that forced us into some pretty hard choices in terms of what staff members would go to what hearings, and that creates a lot of anxiety as well. And so I think the lingering effects of these things coming out of the pandemic are going to be something we really need to keep an eye on for a while.
Thank you for that. Robert?
Well, if I don't repeat, or I'll try not to repeat what Nick had to say, frankly, I think that his summary is right on point. All the things he mentioned are exactly what a lot of our staff have experienced, either personally experiencing whatever it is, either the flood or hurricane, or obviously the winter freeze. Most all of our staff was impacted by that, which meant, of course, no electricity and no heat, and then no water, and then failure of even obtaining food. It became actually a task. But you put that in with the fatigue of COVID, and it just has just added more and more pressure on top of, we all understand that the needs of our clients are even more paramount. We still have cases, we still have hearings. In fact, we had judges that were continuing to hold hearings on cases despite what our lawyers were experiencing. And so we actually had lawyers covering for other lawyers using their cell phone from the car. I mean, what Nick's talking about is real. It happened just as many times here as there, and I have a feeling across the country in many places. It's been a tremendous haul on so many people, and I think we haven't recovered yet. And certainly when we're looking at more and more family violence numbers, for example, and having to try to make adjustments to our priorities and turn down more people that have cases that we care about, is just adding to that pressure, adding to that anxiety, that fatigue. And it's just been very, very difficult on our staff now more than ever.
Thank you for that. Leslie?
Yeah, I would echo that, just to tie in. And we've had people come to us after they've had their virtual hearing telling us that they got kicked out of the hearing when their data ran out. So then they find out that they were evicted after the fact. I mean, those are things that happen, especially when you don't have broadband services in many of our rural counties. They're relying on data that they paid for, and they don't have the money to buy more. So it's been a real challenge. We've had courtrooms that haven't closed. We've had staff who've had to go in and have in-person hearings throughout the pandemic in some of our counties. And so, being in a position to take those risks and to go into a courthouse has been equally challenging. I do want to highlight some of the, I guess, good that can come from this, is that we've been forced to collaborate and think creatively in new ways. And our county governments have reached out because they are getting more calls from their constituents about evictions and foreclosures and unemployment and all the issues that we work in. So the value that they're seeing in terms of our work is certainly heightened. We've been developing virtual outreach tools and using social media in new ways that we think has heightened the education. So, all of those things are important, but to that point, people are getting tired. That fatigue is real, and some of that is tapping into those creative juices and developing new things, and sort of always feeling like you're responding to that next thing is tiring. And at the same time, while our clients are facing all of these challenges, they're seeing it, and often it's our staff who have to work through that trauma with them. And that vicarious trauma that I think Robert mentioned is a real thing. So we've been trying to do more on trauma-informed care and finding ways to make sure that they're being supported in a way that's really meaningful, so that they can still come up with these creative ideas and find ways to respond to the needs in our community.
Thank you, Leslie. Hadassah, how is your staff coping with all of this?
As my colleagues just mentioned so eloquently, we're facing fatigue and stress among our staff, and of course among our clients. Back with the hurricanes, we had staff who lost their homes and belongings, and other staff who had losses due to the earthquakes. But I think the worst effect of all these experiences is the psychological effect in the emotional well-being of our staff. So what we did to support them was right after the earthquakes, we provided a psychologist to offer workshops and personal services to the staff and their families who requested them. And let me tell you that all the staff working in the offices in the southern part of the island requested the services. And we're very pleased to have them available. We also provided emergency kits with safety equipment, water, and snack to all staff. We wanted them to be prepared just in case we have an earthquake while everyone is in the office. We had engineers inspecting all of our offices to ensure safety of our buildings, and we communicate that to the staff. So with the COVID, we have implemented a risk control plan, which has enabled us to continue providing services in a hybrid manner, in person and remotely. So far, we haven't had any COVID case arising from any of our branch offices. But right now, the situation in the island is so critical that the governor just issued a new executive order. And in order to comply with that order, we had to suspend all in-person services for 3 weeks. So right now, our clients are being attended by phone, or we are referring them to our PAI attorneys. Nevertheless, regarding the cases that I mentioned before, the mental health cases, the court administration requested our assistance to deploy attorneys in special courtrooms that have been open to attend the mental health cases. So we are providing that assistance and having our attorneys deployed in those special courtrooms.
One of the things that Leslie touched upon was, despite everything that's going on, the ingenuity and new partnerships that you're engaging in order to better deliver services. I was wondering, Nick, if you have anything that Iowa Legal Aid is proud of in that regard.
Sure. I mean, the responding to the eviction surge has really forced us to kind of reformat how we work in that area. And I think it's led to some really great successes. We've managed to set up help desks in courtrooms throughout the state, which I think has been a really effective way to help a lot of people, at the point of crisis. We've also sort of realigned our internal systems where we now have a dedicated eviction unit, which handles intakes right off the bat. And so we're just kind of operating at a more effective pace to handle the volume. But just as importantly, I think, I've been deeply satisfied with the collaboration that we've had with other human services organizations. That's always been a pretty fundamental part of how we do business, but it's just the deepening of those relationships during these series of disasters. We set up a COVID legal advice hotline at the request it was an emphatic request from the governor's office that we do so quickly. Let's just put it that way. And so we stood that up in about 2 days, and we've got hundreds of volunteer lawyers. We fielded thousands of questions. We've actually taken a few thousand clients out of that as well. but also just dealing with sort of what I would call the basic needs community during the pandemic. We're now working side by side with some of the organizations that are administering the federal rental assistance funds, to the point where we're actually shoulder to shoulder together with these folks at some of the eviction help desks. We have access to the software actually to process the the applications for relief. And so, they're referring clients to us, we're helping them with the applications. And I just feel like if there's one thing that maybe will be a positive outcome from all this, is that just the deepening of those collaborations. And it's funny, like, it's been such an isolating experience for us, many of us in all this, and yet a bright spot for me was the fact that I was participating in several sort of ad hoc committees of different organizations around the state, where I actually met a lot of people just from these periodic, team meetings, whether that's someone from the Salvation Army or from one of the community assistance programs or from a food bank. And I think that lays the groundwork for a great productive collaboration going forward. So.
Thank you for that. Robert, anything that you'd like to highlight from your program?
On the positive side, if we're trying to be a little bit more positive, I would think that if we said everyone needs to learn how to use Teams tomorrow, might have met with some resistance, or having everyone attend a Zoom, or having more people attend a Zoom hearing, or those kinds of things, and we would have met resistance from judges and whatnot. And now, obviously, that's changed. I think technologically, we are so much farther advanced, so we can have more people working remotely or helping clients remotely than ever before, and judges that are more willing to accept appearances remotely. That saves on so much travel time, and travel time for clients signing documents using DocuSign. Would we have ever probably been pushed harder than now, than ever before? And now we have those accounts set up that clients do use them, and it's very effective. They don't have to take off time from work. They can sign, or they can take pictures of documents with their phone, and it's something all of our staff are more familiar with. So technologically, we're much farther along than we've ever been before, and I think those things are going to continue, and it's going to help us represent clients going forward, hopefully when we, quote, get back to normal. I think we're going to see more improvements, and those things are going to stick with us in large part.
Hadassah?
Yeah, I completely agree with what Robert is saying. We've experienced the same thing here in Puerto Rico Legal Services, and right now everyone, all our staff is equipped with mobile equipment, and we can celebrate meetings with just 5 minutes in advance of telling people we're going to meet, in 5 minutes. And that is thanks to, the platform. Teams is the one we're using. And also that has allowed us to have more frequent communication among our staff and with other stakeholders. So I think that is a positive outcome with the pandemic. It definitely is.
Leslie, anything to add there?
I think that there's so much that's been done, and I think there's so much that we can learn from this, and I echo everything they've added.
Well, as we wrap up, as the theme of this is, you're not just dealing with COVID, but a series of disaster and the compounding of that. And so I'd like to get a sense of if you feel that because of the frequency and severity of disasters, your organization is better prepared to meet the future. And if you had one piece of advice to give your fellow grantees or legal services providers on the phone about who maybe don't experience disasters as frequently, what would you tell them to do that you wish you had done? Nick.
Well, I certainly think that the series of natural disasters that we've encountered over the years positioned us to much better respond to the COVID situation. And I think anyone who's worked in and around disaster issues knows that planning and coordination are key. But I have to confess, when I first started, I had the impression that our disaster team went to an awful lot of meetings. There was just an inordinate number of conference calls and groups and groups. And, I said, geez, you guys are doing a lot of meetings here. Then we had this serious flooding in Des Moines in 2018. And it was like supernatural preparedness. There was a disaster recovery set up the following morning. There was a table there with our name on it, and there were staff attorneys there with the materials they needed to respond. This is the next morning, right? And so it's that kind of internal resources in preparing that I think put us in good stead. I'll echo Robert said. I mean, we implemented a very significant technology upgrade, not in any way related to COVID. That flooding that I was talking about, it knocked out a lot of the power infrastructure, and it took out our server. And so our intake and case management system was offline for about 2 days, which was pretty bad thing. And so in response to that, we migrated all our data to the cloud. We got a new phone system that's completely remote enabled. We got a large bank to donate about 200 gently used computers to us. And because of that, when we pivoted to remote work, we were ready. And it went very smoothly for us. And certainly, I'll echo Robert, I think I had wanted to start getting people used to using things like Zoom. And this was a real kick in the behind to make that happen. And I think we do come out of this ready to be more effective. And so if there's advice to other programs, it's just be a Boy Scout, be prepared. Bad things happen. And it's so hard in the world of nonprofits to think about the thing that's beyond today, to think about spending money on something that doesn't solve a problem today. But in the end, your effectiveness as an organization requires capacity, and capacity means planning and resources. And I think that we've seen the benefits of that throughout all of this.
Thank you. And I would send everybody to the Legal Aid Disaster Resource Center to look to see how to become better prepared, which is a direct outgrowth out of the LSC Disaster Task Force. Robert?
I would suggest that to the extent you don't have a permanent disaster team or at least a small group, you should, because there will be one eventually. If there's not one happening right now, it will happen. And you need to have already people on the ground that know who the players are, understand the various systems, for example, FEMA and other things, other state resources, other nonprofits, other NGOs. And so when you say plan, no one has time to plan unless it's their job to do that function. So we have had for many years now a disaster response team, and that is their job. That's what they do. They focus on those issues. And unfortunately, they are being used regularly. But I would encourage those that don't have people that are assigned that job to consider doing that and having people in place who's at least in part work on that particular function. So that they can be prepared. And what will happen is, of course, after disaster occurs, there's a flurry of activity, but then there's going to be people reaching out and wanting to help. And if you don't have a team in place and have a plan in place, you won't know how to utilize those volunteers in that very brief window when there's that call to service. And so, because there are people will come out and say, what can I do to help? And if you don't have a plan in place or you don't have people already working on that plan, you're going to miss incredible opportunities. And so I would recommend that. And the other thing is on the technology side is, have a plan to make sure that you have older computers retired after so many years, whatever y'all think is appropriate. The one I'm talking to you now, I think it's the oldest in the program. I hope it is. It's 6 years old, and I think its days are numbered. And so I would have a plan to retire old equipment whenever that may be, so you're not left with a sudden surge of old equipment you need to retire all at once. Because that's what will happen. You'll need something right away, and it won't work on older equipment. And if you haven't had a retirement plan in place, then you're going to have to replace a lot at once, and that can be a huge shock to any program.
Leslie,
I don't know that we can say prepare enough. I just don't think that we can. I think the thing that I would add to what Nick and Robert have said is that preparedness, and the technology is an example of it, has to be internal as well as preparing for what your external response is going to be, and making sure, we've brought in new staff since our last disaster, and making sure they understand what that process looks like. And we're trying to build in redundancies so that if someone on that team is impacted by the disaster and can't respond, someone else is able to step into their space and make sure that response is still happening. And then the only other thing is that I think sometimes, at least in our communities, resiliency is a synonym for picking yourself up by your bootstraps, which it's not. And again, just a reminder that oftentimes the people that we serve and some of our own staff members don't have the resources to pick themselves up by their bootstraps quickly after a disaster. If they've lost their homes, if they've lost family members, if they've lost, their family members have lost jobs, whatever the case may be, that we're being responsive to those needs as well.
and Hadassah?
Well, I echo everything that Nick and Leslie and Robert just said. I would add to that and recommend to other programs to have a business continuity plan and have everything in writing. Make sure everyone in your program knows the plan and everyone knows what to do before the disaster arrives. Thanks to the disaster funds received from LSC, we hire Legal Server for the creation of an offline application, which allow us to open and access case files, even if we do not have internet service. Because the problem is that if you don't have electricity or power, you will not have internet access. So for us, that was a crisis after the hurricanes, because Puerto Rico was without electricity for a very, very long time. So now we have this application, thanks to those funds that we received. The offline module was translated into Spanish and is being tested. So we will have in-house training very soon. So those of you who have Legal Server as your case management program, I'm sure you will have access to that application. And we also acquired 2 Ford Transit vans, which will serve us as mobile offices and have access to internet and power generators. So anything that you think is needed to be prepared is not enough. You need to think what to do before the disaster comes and what to do after. So it's very important what my colleagues just mentioned. Coordination efforts with stakeholders in your area are fundamental to be prepared to respond to the necessities of the people we are serving. So anyone of you who wants information about our application, the application I just mentioned, you can contact us and we will gladly provide the information.
Thank you so much, Hadassah. And I'd like to thank the entire panel for, one, participating today, but more than that, for everything that they do every day, their leadership in working with their staffs and serving clients. We can't thank you enough, and thank you for everything.